A broke student lent his dying phone to a stranger, unaware she was a millionaire who'd change his life forever. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is now. Subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The city cut like a blade that evening, wind slicing through Jake Miller's worn jacket as he trudged from the diner, grease clinging to his hands, his breath clouded in the dusk. Each puff a mark of the long shift behind him and night classes ahead. The street roared with headlights and hurried steps, but Jake's eyes caught a woman at the bus stop, her elegant coat trembling against the cold. She clutched a dead phone, her fingers pale, her face a mask of quiet panic. "Hey," Jake called, his voice soft but clear, piercing the city's clamor. "Need a call?" He pulled his own phone from his pocket, battery at 3%, screen cracked. Her eyes, sharp as dusk, flicked up, wary but desperate. She nodded, a single dip of her chin. "It's conceptual emergency," she said, her voice low, polished like a stream over smooth stones. Jake handed over the phone without hesitation, his calloused fingers brushing hers. She dialed swiftly, her words clipped as she spoke of a missed flight, a stranded colleague. Jake shifted on his feet, the cold seeping into his sneakers. But he stayed, watching her face soften with relief as she hung up. "Thanks," she said, returning the phone. Her gaze lingered, catching the warmth in Jake's steady eyes. "You didn't have to." "It's okay," he shrugged, hands back in his pockets. "Hope it helped." The bus screeched to a stop and she stepped toward it, her coat swirling like a shadow. Jake turned away, his steps quick toward the subway, the phone now dead in his hand. He didn't see her glance back, her eyes narrowing as if memorizing his silhouette against the city's glow. Elena Brooks sat on the bus, the stranger's kindness a faint ember in her chest. She'd seen him before. Not his face, but his type. The quiet ones who gave without expecting, who moved through the world like bamboo bending in a storm. Her fingers tightened around her bag, the weight of her guarded life pressing down. A tech investor, a philanthropist, she was used to calculating risks, not receiving gifts. Yet that cracked phone, offered so freely, stirred something she hadn't felt in years. The bus rattled past neon signs, and Elena's mind drifted to a memory, a childhood night, her mother's hands sewing late, the hum of a machine filling their cramped apartment. Trust was a luxury then, and now, after a betrayal that cost her first company, it was a relic. But this boy, with his easy generosity, cracked that armor, just a hair. Jake, underground now, leaned against a subway pole, the train's sway lulling his weary frame. His mother's face flashed in his mind, her smile from a better day, before hospital bills piled up. He'd skipped dinner to save a few bucks, his stomach a quiet ache. The phone dead in his pocket was a small loss. Helping someone felt like a win, a flicker of light in his endless grind. Elena stepped off the bus into her sleek high-rise, the city sprawling below like a sea of stars. She powered on her laptop, her fingers hesitating before typing. A quick search, a few discreet inquiries. She knew how to find people. The boy's name surfaced, Jake Miller, college senior, juggling jobs, his life a patchwork of resilience. She leaned back, her breath catching. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a mirror, reflecting a kindness she'd forgotten how to trust. Jake, home now, flicked on a dim lamp in his apartment, the chill barely eased by a wheezing heater. He set the dead phone on a table, next to a faded photo of his mother. His eyes lingered there, heavy with love and worry. He didn't know Elena was already tracing his steps, her heart stirred by his quiet strength. She'd seen him before, she realized, weeks ago, giving his scarf to a homeless man, unnoticed. Like a shadow half seen in dawn's light, he carried a secret, the power to change her, without ever knowing. Jake Miller pushed open the door to his apartment, the hinges creaking like a sigh. The air inside was stale, barely warmed by a rattling heater that coughed more than it heated. His sneakers scuffed the worn floorboards as he dropped his bag, the day's weight, diner shifts, lecture notes, a dead phone, settling into his frame. The city's hum seeped through the thin walls, a distant clamor against the quiet of his small world. He flicked on a lamp, its yellow glow catching a faded photo on the table. His mother, her smile bright, her hands folded from a time before the hospital bed became her home. He sank onto a chair, his fingers tracing the photo's edge. Her laugh echoed in his mind, sharp and warm, from nights when she'd braid his hair and tell stories of rice fields and moonlit rivers. Now her breaths were shallow, her strength stolen by illness, and Jake's 3 jobs barely covered the bills. He rubbed his eyes, hunger gnawing at his gut, but he pushed it aside. The phone, lent to that woman, was a small price for a moment of good. He plugged it in, the screen staying dark, and leaned back, his shoulders heavy but still. Across the city, Elena Brooks sat in her glass-walled office, the skyline a mosaic of shadowed towers beyond. Her laptop hummed, its blue light harsh against her face. She'd meant to review a funding proposal, but her thoughts kept circling back to the boy at the bus stop. His cracked phone, his easy shrug, his eyes warm as a candle's flicker. She tapped her pen, the rhythm sharp, betraying the restlessness beneath her calm. His kindness had been a pebble dropped in still water, rippling through her heart. She opened a new tab, her fingers swift as she searched. Jake Miller wasn't hard to find, not with her resources. A college senior, low-income, part-time waiter, delivery driver, tutor. Social media scraps painted a picture. Posts about his mother's health, a fundraiser he'd started, a photo of him laughing with classmates. No complaints, no bitterness, just quiet grit, like bamboo standing through a storm. Elena's throat tightened. Years ago, a business partner had gutted her first startup, stealing funds and trust, leaving her to rebuild alone. Jake's life was a different kind of hard, worn with dignity. Her office was silent, save for the faint tick of a clock. A memory stirred. Her mother sewing late, the needle's rhythm a lullaby in their cramped apartment. Elena had been 9, clutching a wooden bookmark her mother carved, a keepsake lost years later in a move. Trust had been easy then, before the world taught her to lock her heart. She stood pacing to the window, the city's lights blurring. Jake's act, lending that phone, felt like a challenge, a dare to believe in goodness again. Jake heated a can of soup, the stove's hiss a faint comfort. He ate standing, spoon clinking against the bowl, his eyes drifting to the photo again. His mother's hands, once strong, now trembled. He'd held them last week, her skin paper thin. He'd promised her he'd graduate, make her proud. But the weight of it, bills, classes, jobs, pressed like a stone. He set the bowl down, the soup half-eaten, and grabbed his laptop. Assignments waited, but his mind wandered to the woman at the bus stop. Her voice, low and steady, had carried a warmth that lingered like a firefly's glow in dusk. Elena sat again, her fingers hovering over her phone. She could call her assistant, have Jake found, thank him properly. But what would she say? "You reminded me of trust?" The thought felt raw, exposed. She scrolled through his fundraiser instead, reading comments from strangers he'd helped, a classmate with groceries, a neighbor with rent. Her chest ached. She'd meant to send a thank you note, a quick gesture, but now she saw him clearly. Not just a kind stranger, but a life woven with quiet sacrifices, unspoken like a song caught in the throat. Jake closed his laptop, the screen's glow fading. He glanced at the dead phone, its cord snaking across the table. Tomorrow he'd borrow a charger, keep going. He didn't know Elena was already tracing his steps, her heart stirred by his resilience. She'd seen him before, she realized. Weeks ago, sharing his lunch with a homeless man, unnoticed. His life, laid bare in fragments online, held a truth she couldn't name, a melody she hadn't heard in years. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed, casting sharp shadows on the checkered floor as Jake Miller wiped down a counter, his hands quick despite the late hour. Grease and coffee stained his apron, and his eyes, bright despite late hours, flicked to the clock. 10 minutes until closing. The city's clamor pulsed outside, but inside, the clatter of plates and the hiss of the grill held sway. A bell jingled, and Jake looked up, his cloth pausing. A woman stood at the door, her tailored coat out of place among the vinyl booths. Her dark hair caught the light, and her eyes, sharp as dusk, locked onto his. "Jake?" Her voice was soft, familiar, like a stream over stones. He blinked, the memory of the bus stop flashing, her shivering hands, his dead phone. She stepped closer, her heels clicking, and the diner's noise seemed to fade. "I'm Elena Brooks. We met a few nights ago." He nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, I remember." He set the cloth down, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You okay? That call work out?" His smile was small, warm, but his brows knit, sensing something bigger in her presence. Elena's fingers tightened around her bag, her poise masking a flicker of nerves. "It did. Thanks to you." She glanced around, the diner's hum a stark contrast to her sleek world. "Can we talk? Just a minute." Jake gestured to a booth, his movements quick, and they slid in, the vinyl creaking. Her gaze softened, catching the weariness in his slumped shoulders, the warmth in his eyes. I looked you up, she said, her words direct, cutting through the diner's din. You're a senior, working 3 jobs, helping your mom. Jake's jaw tightened, surprise flickering. He wasn't used to being seen. I run a foundation, she continued, her voice steady, like a candle's flicker. We fund tech solutions, coding camps, community hubs for underserved youth, rebuilding what betrayal took from me. I want to offer you a full-ride scholarship and a spot in our leadership program. Jake's breath caught, his hands stilling on the table. The words felt like a gust through a quiet field, stirring everything. A scholarship? His voice was quiet, disbelief threading through it. Why me? He leaned forward, searching her face, his eyes tracing the faint lines of her soft smile. Elena hesitated, her fingers tracing her coat's edge. Because you gave without asking, she said. That night, you didn't know me, but you helped. That's rare. Her voice dipped, a ripple of something raw. I built my foundation after a partner stole my first company. Funds, trust, everything. I see that strength in you, Jake. Her eyes met his, open, vulnerable, and Jake's gaze held hers, steady. For a moment, the diner's clamor fell away, leaving only the weight of their words. I don't know, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, his boyish habit surfacing. I'm just getting by. Doubt shadowed his face, years of scraping by, whispering that gifts like this came with strings. But Elena's eyes, warm and piercing, held no deceit, only a quiet conviction that felt like moonlight on a river. Think about it, she said, sliding a card across the table. It's not charity, it's belief in you. She stood, her coat swirling, and Jake rose too, his movements quick, instinctive. Call me, she added, her smile brief, like a lotus blooming at dawn. He nodded, clutching the card, its edges sharp against his calloused fingers. I will. The bell jingled as she left, the cold night swallowing her silhouette. Jake stood frozen, the diner's lights buzzing above. The scholarship was a lifeline, but her words, belief in you, landed deeper, stirring a hope he hadn't dared to name. Elena stepped into the city's clamor, her breath clouding in the chill. Jake's face lingered in her mind, his warm eyes, his quiet strength. She'd offered the scholarship to help, but his doubt, his raw honesty, mirrored her own buried wounds. Trust was her scar, carved by that old betrayal. Yet Jake's kindness, his unguarded heart, felt like a call to mend it. She walked faster, the skyline a mosaic of shadowed towers, her heart a tangle of resolve and vulnerability. Jake locked the diner's door, the card still in his hand. He flipped it over, her name in crisp print, Elena Brooks. But it wasn't her title that struck him. It was her smile, soft yet true, like a face glimpsed in starlight. She wasn't just a stranger offering help. She was someone carrying her own quiet burdens. A loneliness he recognized in the set of her shoulders, the flicker in her eyes. He slipped the card into his pocket, the weight of her belief settling beside his own fragile hope, like a seed taking root in dawn's soft light. Jake Miller's sneakers slapped the campus pavement, his backpack slung loose over one shoulder. Sunlight cut through the autumn trees, dappling the quad where students laughed and scrolled phones. 3 weeks into Elena's scholarship, his days had shifted. Fewer diner shifts, more classes, and the leadership program's workshops on coding, leadership, and community outreach that pushed him to think bigger. His steps were lighter, his shoulders less hunched, like a bamboo shoot breaking through hard soil. But doubt still lingered, a quiet hum beneath his new rhythm as he wondered if he belonged in this polished orbit. In a glass-walled meeting room, Elena Brooks watched Jake present his group's community project, her pen tapping softly. His voice, once hesitant, now carried a steady warmth, outlining plans for a youth mentorship hub to teach kids to dream beyond survival. Lila, a program peer, nodded at Jake's ideas, her sharp questions pushing him sharper. Elena's lips curved, a rare smile, as she caught the spark in his eyes. Clear, alive. Her own world, once a fortress of calculated risks, felt softer in his presence, like a stream finding new paths. Solid work, Jake, she said after the meeting, her voice soft, cutting through the chatter of departing students. He turned, his grin boyish, shifting his weight, restless. Thanks, he said, his eyes meeting hers, warm as a firefly's glow. Still feels like I'm faking it sometimes. His honesty landed like a pebble in still water, and Elena's chest tightened, her own imposter fears echoing faintly. They walked to the campus cafe, the air crisp with fallen leaves. Jake ordered a coffee, fumbling coins, and Elena waved it off. paying with a quick tap of her card. They sat at a corner table, the hum of students a soft backdrop. "You're not faking it," she said, her gaze steady. "You're building something real." Jake leaned forward, his hands wrapping the warm mug, and nodded, a flicker of belief taking root. The conversation turned lighter, their words weaving easily. Jake teased her about her perfect handwriting, and Elena laughed. A rare, clear sound, like a bell in the morning mist. But as she reached for her cup, it tipped, coffee splashing across the table and onto Jake's notebook. "Oh no!" she gasped, grabbing napkins, her poise slipping. Jake chuckled, blotting the pages, his calm unfazed. "It's fine," he said, flipping the notebook open to dry it. Elena's eyes caught a sketch on the damp page. Delicate lines of a woman's hands, folded gently, worn but strong. "Your mom?" she asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Jake nodded, his smile fading, his fingers tracing the drawing. "Yeah, from when she was healthier." The air stilled, the cafe's noise receding. Elena's throat tightened, a memory stirring. Her own mother's hands calloused from sewing, carving a wooden bookmark she'd lost years ago. The sketch wasn't just ink, it was a thread to her own buried grief, unnoticed until now, like a hidden stream beneath leaves. She cleared her throat, her fingers tracing her coat's edge. "It's beautiful," she said, her words careful, carrying a weight Jake didn't yet see. He closed the notebook, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, the space between them felt fragile, alive, like moonlight on a river. "Thanks," he said, his voice soft, sensing something shift, but not naming it. A text buzzed, his mother's doctor, noting her strength returning, a spark of hope. Jake's eyes lit up, a quiet relief settling in. They parted soon after, Jake heading to class, Elena to her office. He walked faster now, the notebook tucked under his arm, Elena's words, "You're building something real," echoing in his chest. The scholarship, the program, her belief. It was a lifeline, but her laugh, her fleeting vulnerability over the spilled coffee, felt like a bridge to something deeper, a bond he hadn't expected. Elena sat at her desk, the city's glow softening beyond her window. The sketch lingered in her mind, those hands so like her mother's, stirring an ache she'd long buried. Jake's world, his quiet resilience, his unguarded heart, was unraveling her carefully built walls. She opened her laptop, pulling up his project proposal, but her thoughts drifted. That coffee spill, that sketch, wasn't just a moment. It was a mirror, reflecting a loss she hadn't faced, a connection she hadn't dared to want. Jacob in a lecture hall scribbled notes, the professor's voice a distant hum. His pen paused, his eyes drifting to the notebook's edge, where coffee stains marked the sketch. Elena's face flashed, her smile, her sudden softness. She wasn't just a mentor, she was someone carrying her own quiet scars. Her elegance a shield he was beginning to see through. The thought settled like a seed, small but heavy, tying their paths in ways he couldn't yet name, like a thread woven through a village tapestry. Jake Miller stood at the front of the conference room, his voice steady as he pitched his mentorship hub to a small crowd of foundation donors. The projector hummed, casting charts across the wall, but it was Jake's words, vivid, woven with stories of kids like him, that held the room. His hub, designed to mentor youth through skills and hope, was gaining traction. Lila and Sam, peers from the program, exchanged nods, inspired by his vision. 6 months into the scholarship, he moved with new confidence. Like a bamboo shoot grown tall, though doubt flickered in quiet moments, a shadow on his heart. Elena Brooks sat at the back, her pen still, her eyes fixed on Jake. His growth stirred pride, sharp and warm, but also a pang she couldn't name. His voice, his easy way of connecting, cracked her defenses, letting light into places she'd kept dark. Her fingers brushed a wooden bookmark in her pocket, a gift Jake had given her last week, carved by hand, its rough edges soft under her touch. It was a small thing, offered with a shy grin, but it landed like a leaf on a quiet stream, rippling through her heart, now open. The room clapped as Jake finished, donors nodding, and he flashed a smile, shifting his weight, energized. Elena stood, her heels clicking as she joined him at the front, her voice smooth as she thanked the group. Their eyes met, a fleeting glance like a lotus blooming at dawn, and Jake's grin widened, boyish, unguarded. "Nailed it, right?" he whispered, and she laughed, a rare sound, clear as a bell in the morning mist. Later, they stayed in the empty room, sorting papers under fluorescent lights. The city's glow flickered beyond the glass. "You were incredible," Elena said, her words direct, cutting through the quiet. Jake shrugged, stacking folders, but his eyes glowed. "Felt good," he said. "Like I'm actually doing something." His voice dipped, softer. "Thanks for pushing me." Elena's throat tightened, his gratitude stirring a vulnerability she rarely allowed. "You pushed yourself," she said, her gaze dropping to the bookmark, now on the table. She picked it up, her fingers tracing its grain. It means a lot." Her voice wavered, and Jake's brows knit, sensing a shift. "After Mom died, I built a company," she said, her words quick, raw. "A partner stole it. Funds, trust. The foundation channels that loss into tech access for kids like you were. It's reached thousands, giving them tools to rise, like you. I locked her memory away, like I locked myself. This brings her back." Her eyes met Jake's, raw, open, and his gaze held hers, steady, close, like a hearth's glow. Jake leaned forward, his hands still. "Your mom?" he asked, his voice steady, remembering the coffee spill, her reaction to his sketch. Elena nodded, her eyes distant, fixed on a memory. Her mother's hands carving a similar bookmark, lost in a move years ago. The ache was old, buried under her success, but Jake's gift had cracked it open, raw and sharp, like a rift in a village well. "I didn't know," he said, his voice gentle, his eyes steady, his own losses, his mother's illness, his endless grind, lacing his words. She set the bookmark down, her fingers trembling. "You couldn't have," she said, forcing a smile. "But it's good." The air felt heavy, alive, their words weaving a bond as delicate as lotus threads. "You're not alone in that," Jake said, his voice firm, his gaze unwavering. His words landed softly, a bridge across their shared pain. They worked in silence after, the moment settling like dust. Jake's phone lit up, his mom's test stable, a gentle triumph. But the bookmark, the confession, shifted something. Jake's confidence grew, his steps surer as he left for class. The blazer a second skin now. Elena's belief, her quiet vulnerability, fueled him, a fire he carried into late-night study sessions. His dreams of change no longer distant, but close, like a candle's flicker. Elena walked to her office, the bookmark back in her pocket, its weight a reminder. Jake's growth mirrored her own unhealed wounds, his kindness a mirror she couldn't ignore. She sat at her desk, the skyline a tapestry of softened lights, and opened a file on her laptop. Jake's project, now funded. Pride swelled, but so did fear. The bookmark wasn't just a gift, it was a key, unlocking a grief she'd locked away, a rift deeper than she'd admitted. Hovered over her phone, wanting to call him, to share more, but she stopped, her heart a tangle of trust and terror. Jake in a lecture hall scribbled notes, the professor's voice a hum. His pen paused, his thoughts on Elena, her laugh, her trembling fingers. She wasn't just a mentor, she was a soul carrying scars, her elegance a shield he was learning to see through. The bookmark, a small act, had stirred her, and that stirred him, a ripple he felt but couldn't name, like a seed sprouting in dawn's soft light. The autumn air was crisp, heavy with the scent of damp leaves as Jake Miller and Elena Brooks walked a winding path through a city park. The leadership program's retreat had brought them here, a rare pause from conference rooms and deadlines. Golden light slanted through the trees, catching the edges of Jake's faded jacket and Elena's sleek coat, their steps in sync, though their thoughts churned like a river beneath a quiet surface. The park hummed softly, distant laughter, the rustle of leaves, a bird's call at dusk, wrapping them in a fragile calm. Jake's hands were stuffed in his pockets, his shoulders loose, but his eyes flicked to Elena, catching the way she moved, her poise a quiet strength. 8 months into the scholarship, he carried himself with ease, his voice steady in meetings, his mentorship hub now a funded reality. Its first mentees were thriving, coding apps, dreaming big, a spark Jake fanned daily. His peers looked to him now, his ideas shaping the program's future, a leader emerging. He coordinated projects, guiding peers with steady vision, his voice a quiet anchor. Yet her presence, her sharp gaze, her rare laughs, stirred something deeper, a warmth he couldn't name, like a firefly's flicker in a quiet night. Elena walked with her usual poise, but her steps slowed, her eyes tracing the path's curve. Jake's growth, his quiet strength, had unraveled her defenses, each shared moment, A coffee spill, a carved bookmark, peeling back her layers. She felt exposed, her heart a tapestry of trust and fear, woven tight by a past that still stung. The bookmark, tucked in her pocket, pressed against her, a reminder of her mother's hands, of losses she hadn't faced. "You're quiet today," Jake said, his voice soft, cutting through the park's hum. He glanced at her, his smile small but warm, like a lotus blooming at dawn. "Everything okay?" His question was gentle, but it landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through her. Elena's lips parted, then closed, her fingers tracing her coat's edge. "Just thinking," she said, her voice steady, almost lost in the rustle of leaves. She wanted to say more, to share the weight of her mother's memory, the betrayal that scarred her, but the words caught, heavy as unspoken songs. Jake's eyes held hers, steady, patient, and she felt the pull of his kindness, a dare to let go. They stopped by a bench, the wood worn smooth, overlooking a pond where leaves drifted. Jake sat, leaning forward, his hands clasped. "This place reminds me of home," he said, his voice distant. "Not the city, but before. Mom used to take me to a park like this. We'd feed ducks, talk about nothing." His smile faded, his eyes on the water, reflecting his mother's fading health, the bills still piling despite his new path. Elena sat beside him, her coat brushing his jacket, the space between them alive, fragile. "My mom loved parks too," she said, her words quick, surprising her. "She'd sit with me, carve little things, bookmarks, toys. I lost most of them." Her voice cracked and she looked away, her fingers finding the bookmark in her pocket, its rough edges grounding her. "Last week I sat with her old sewing kit," she added, her voice soft. "The bookmark, it brought her back. I stitched a patch like she taught me." Her smile was small, a dawn breaking. Jake turned, his gaze soft, sensing the weight of her words. "That's why the bookmark got to you," he said, his voice quiet, like a firefly's flicker. Elena nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah," she said, her eyes on the pond. "I locked her memory away, like I locked myself." The confession spilled fast, raw, and she braced for judgment. But Jake's face held only understanding, his own losses mirrored in her pain. He reached out, his hand brushing hers, a deliberate touch that steadied her. "You didn't push her away," he said, his words firm but gentle. "You're carrying her. That's why you do what you do. Your foundation, all of it." His eyes held hers, warm, piercing, and Elena's breath caught, his belief cutting through her fear like a blade through mist. She pulled her hand back, her heart racing, not from rejection but from the truth in his words. "And you?" she asked, her voice sharper, deflecting. "You carry your mom too, but you're killing yourself to save her." The words were bold, a challenge, and Jake flinched, his jaw tightening. He looked away, the pond's surface rippling under a gust, reflecting his own quiet reckoning. "Maybe," he said, his voice quiet, raw, "but I don't know another way." The air stilled, their truths laid bare, like a path exposed by moonlight. Elena's chest ached, not just for him, but for herself, for the trust she'd denied, the connection she'd feared. Jake's hand rested on the bench, close but not touching, and she felt the pull to bridge that gap, to meet his courage with her own openness. Jake slipped into the hospital that evening, the sterile halls softer now. His mother's smile, stronger than he'd seen in months, greeted him. "You're doing it, kid," she said, her voice thin but proud, her recovery a quiet gift from the scholarship's relief. He squeezed her hand, her warmth a tether to his purpose. They stood, the park's light fading, the air cooler now. "We should head back," Jake said, his smile returning, softer like a dawn breaking. Elena nodded, her fingers brushing the bookmark, her heart lighter but not free. Lila and Sam waved from the retreat's campfire, their laughs mingling with the group's grounding Jake's new world. They walked back, their steps slower, the rustle of leaves a quiet chorus. The moment wasn't a resolution, but a turning, a gentle reckoning that shifted their paths. Jake glanced at her, his eyes catching the way she tucked her scarf, a small gesture he'd come to cherish. He'd sought a mentor, a chance to rise, but found something else, a soul whose scars echoed his, whose strength called to his own. Elena, beside him, felt the same shift, her heart stirring not just for his kindness, but for the mirror he held, the trust she'd lost, now reflected in his steady gaze, like a path leading to an unexpected home. They reached the retreat center, the group's laughter spilling out, but they paused at the door. The city's murmur faded into dusk. Jake's hand brushed hers again, deliberate, a promise unspoken, like a seed planted in dusk's soft light. They stepped inside, the warmth of the room enveloping them, but the park's quiet truth lingered, a melody they'd both begun to hear. The summit hall buzzed, a throng of suits and screens under radiant chandeliers. Jake Miller stood at the podium, his voice clear, carrying 2 years' growth. At 24, he was no longer the weary student, his blazer tailored, his eyes bright with purpose. Over 2 years, he'd grown the hub, mentoring teams, building hope from quiet roots. His project coordination and vision shaped its growth. As Director of Human Impact Initiatives, he spoke of his mentorship hub, now lifting 500 kids with mentors, skills, hope, ripples from one night's kindness. Elena's foundation, empowering thousands, amplified his vision. The crowd leaned in, caught by his warmth, his story of a cold evening's phone loan that changed everything. Elena Brooks sat in the front row, her hands clasped, her elegant coat folded beside her. Her fingers brushed the bookmark in her pocket, a quiet anchor, her mother's love woven into their mutual trust, binding their shared peace and summit vision. Her eyes traced Jake's gestures, his steady hands, once calloused from diner shifts, now shaping futures. Pride swelled, soft and warm, tempered by their shared path. 2 years ago, she'd borrowed his phone. Now they were partners, professional, personal, bound by trust forged in quiet moments, like a stream finding its sea. Jake glanced at his phone before speaking, his mother's face on a video call, her eyes bright from home. "Go shine," she whispered, her health a fragile victory, a gift of the scholarship's relief. His words slowed, his gaze finding Elena's, a fleeting glance like a lotus blooming at dawn. "One act can ripple," he said, his voice resonant. "A phone lent, a chance given. It's how we build." The crowd clapped, but his eyes stayed on her, a smile tugging his lips, boyish, warm as a candle's flicker. She returned it, her heart light. The speech ended and Jake stepped down, the crowd's hum swallowing him. Elena rose, her heels clicking as she met him backstage, where Lila and Sam, program peers, clapped his shoulder. "You killed it," she grinned, the team's bond tight. The noise faded as they moved to a quiet corner, the summit's pulse softening. "You were brilliant," Elena said, her voice direct. Jake rubbed the back of his neck, his grin wide. "Felt like I was just talking to you," he said, and her laugh rang, clear as a bell in the morning mist. Elena reached out, straightening his tie, her fingers brushing his chest. "Your trust," she said, "healed what that betrayal broke." The touch was brief, familiar, a thread woven through countless moments, coffees, park walks, shared truths. "We did this," she added, her eyes holding his, dusk dark and steady. Jake nodded, his hand covering hers, warm, grounding. "Couldn't have without you," he said, his voice soft, carrying his mother's recovery, his rise. The summit's lights dimmed, voices fading as the crowd thinned. Jake glanced at the stage, then back at Elena, his eyes tracing her face, her sharp cheekbones, her smile now open, true. "What's next?" he asked, half teasing, his voice holding a deeper question, a future unwritten but shared. Elena's fingers tightened on his, the bookmark's weight a reminder of her mended scars. "More," she said, her voice firm, a promise. "For them, for us." The words settled like a soft note in a folk song, echoing outward. They stepped into the hall, hands clasped, the skyline glittering beyond, a canvas of possibility. Jake's steps were sure, Elena's poise softer, their partnership a melody forged in trust, not triumph. Outside, the morning air was cool, the city waking under a tender dawn. They paused, the world stretching before them, uncertain but bright. Jake's eyes met hers, warm, steady, and Elena felt it. A peace, incomplete but shared, like hands clasped in the morning mist. The summit's applause faded, replaced by the soft hum of a new day, their paths entwined, not by grand gestures, but by quiet understanding, a bond as enduring as a candle's flicker. They walked on side by side, the future a horizon they'd face together. No twist, no jolt, just a breath of peace, a shared dawn rising, gentle as a folk melody, carrying them forward, hearts lighter into the light. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope can be found in the most surprising moments, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Love Story. We bring you stories that touch the soul, renew your belief in kindness, and highlight what's truly important in life.